recording, so assume the smile. Hello again, and welcome back to the 8th installment of our journey through the Oracle of the Hekatean Path. Just to remind you, as we're recording this, the Oracle of the Hekatean Path is to be published by Lo Scarabeo on February the 24th, 2024, which is not far away. So also just to remind you, we don't actually have our copies of the deck yet. We're due them any day. So we are working from our test copies, which are smaller and a different shape. And because we've made changes, we won't be showing you much of these, but we will be putting the up-to-date images as they'll appear in the deck on screen as we're talking. So fire away. Card number 37.
Yes, so card 37 is Dagger, and it stands for Severance.
Okay.
And I think you kind of quite enjoyed this card when we made
it. But I also, it was one of those finally after all these years moments. And I can't remember whether I told you why, because the face on this card is a lovely lady called Patty. And I actually photographed Patty with a view to being included in the Quantum Tarot. And when we dropped the image into the composition, it didn't quite work despite it being a stunning photo. So we ended up going with something else. And then I tried reusing Dear Patty's image again in another project, which worked brilliantly. And then the project got abandoned because it was another one of my difficult collaborations. And then when we were looking for an image for this, it's like, I thought, finally. And of course, we put Patty into this and she just rocked it.
Yeah.
So it was a classic example from an artist's point of view. Just because something doesn't work first time, it doesn't mean to say it's wasted. Just put it in your archives and it will have its moment. So I did love doing this card for that reason, but also because it's one of the most straightforward but totally dramatic and in-your-face images in the deck, as far as I'm concerned. And it just it hits home, you know.
Yeah.
I loved the simplicity of your concept here, and it just has a very, to me, it has a very chilling effect in all the right ways because it enhances the meaning of the card. So
yeah.
Tell me what you were thinking anyway behind this, because I do think I think it's a fabulous card and it fascinates me.
I mean, my main thing was I didn't just want it to be, you know, a dagger or, you know, just literally an object like, you know, Ace of Swords type concept. I wanted to show this tool and symbol of Hecate as being used and, you know, being put to use for, you know, the keyword of severance. And then the more we kind of played with the color schemes and there's quite a lot of like nice sharp edges and there's a symmetry to it. It kind of gave you that whole thing of that dual edged blade, and it can, you know, there are different ways and extremes that it can be put to use. It can be used for defense, it can be used to free the chords of the previous card, you know. And it's another one of those symbols that's often depicted in the triple forms of Hecate, especially in some of the like intaglio gem carvings, that you know, she's got a dagger in one hand and you know the other symbols such as the torch and the rope and the snakes and the keys. So it was another one of those symbols I definitely wanted to include just because it has so much resonance with getting rid of things, you know, and as well as that sort of airy notion that the tarot lends to it, that you know, it's you know, sharp wit, determination and things like that. And just this steely face with this sharp, you know, the crescent moon looks as sharp as the blade. And so it resonates with all of the right energy for basically putting it to use. And I like the way that we didn't overly focus on the blade, and yet it's still quite sharp.
I thought, I mean, your idea of having the blade in front of her face, right down the center, and it does, for me, what worried me with this was we've used lots of statues in this deck, which really gives a sense of, you know, we relate those statues to the goddess or to the pantheon of gods, and, you know, Greco-Roman goddesses, you know, that's how we, you know, our primary way of seeing them artistically is through statues, you know. So they kind of have this immediate sense where I thought, oh, we're into a bit of a different realm when we're using a real human face. But the fact that the sword kind of partially obscures her face, and all, you know, you can, you know, her eyes are peering out from either side, that just really worked. And I thought that concept from you was very clever, because you do get a sense of being right close up, and maybe she's, you know, maybe she's holding the dagger like this, but we don't see her hand, we don't see the hilt. And it does seem to work. And I think because we kind of framed it with clouds in a sort of diamond formation and rays emanating from the, you know, below the dagger at the bottom, it does have this very angular, very sharp, very sort of definite feel to it. And again, it just brings me back to the whole concept again of separations, endings, beginnings, letting go, all the things that we've discussed in different aspects through other cards.
Yeah, definitely. We have
it's a very straightforward card, but at the same time, it's so multi-layered as well.
We have got a guest introducing Luna. She's decided she wants some cuddles.
We thankfully do have the Luna Beast.
Yes.
So we'll just assume that she's channeling the goddess, and she's very welcome. So anyway, moving on to the next one.
Card 38, which is the cave and incubation. And again, this is one of those sort of enduring images. It's, you know, it's quite a powerful symbol and archetype in and of itself. Yeah. But its connection with Hecate comes from the Homeric hymn to Demeter, because it's said that Hecate hears Persephone's cries from her cave, and although she doesn't see the abduction, she hears it. And so this has been interpreted by some people that the abduction happened during the day and Hecate was the moon, and therefore she was in the cave, i.e. the underworld, you know, and not obviously in the sky where she could see things. And then obviously from there, Hecate and Demeter both go to see Helios, because obviously he can see everything. And so it comes from that as a route for including it in this deck. But what I wanted to sort of represent with the incubation thing is that very sense of, when we were talking about the Philaremos card and then you know, the need to retreat, sometimes, you know, the Philaremos card and the cave can go hand in hand, and you might actually need to retreat and incubate and gestate on an idea or a decision, or you know, before you rush ahead and you know, enact things. And again, it was one of those images that I was like, right, well, I know what it is. It's a cave. It's like, but how do we make it look like something and not be either, you know, really bog standardly boring, or you know, something a bit subterranean, which is what I kind of wanted.
And we kind of pulled an interesting trick off with that, though, didn't we? Because it's not what you would think.
No, I think it's about 3 different images.
It's 3 different images, yeah. Because the only one that is a genuine cave image is what you see at the center, with all of the hanging stalactites, you know, stalactite. Yeah. The bottom image was a close up of amethyst crystal formations, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That we used for the floor. But then the actual cave itself is not a cave, and I've kind of played a trick with an image that I love, and one that I first came across in the early 2000s. I used to work in a high-end framing centre in London. And it was just as I was setting out as a freelancer, I was kind of easing my way from, paid employment into freelancing as an artist. And one of the images that came through my department for framing was a giant photo print of one of the iconic Scott expedition Antarctic images. And it's the image of Scott's ship seen from the mouth of this massive ice cave. It's basically like a sort of where the water had eroded the ice in a crack in an iceberg, and then kind of eroded it away into this amazing cave formation. They'd obviously sort of gone and stood inside that and taken the photo of the ship from the outside. So it is a cave, but it's not a cave in that it's actually, these are walls of ice, but it worked beautifully, and I think it gives it that sense of surrealness that we needed.
Exactly, and we wanted, obviously, for it to be a cave, or so we had the stalagmites or tights, whichever one's point down. I can't remember.
I was hoping you'd correct me if I was wrong.
Isn't it tights go up and mites go down?
We're digging ourselves into the pit even further, so if you're watching, we'll leave you to form your own conclusions on that one.
So for the floor to have the sort of the geode amethyst crystalline structure, we hinted then at the riches of the underworld. To the ancient Greeks, Pluton, the wealth came from the earth, so all of the gold and the gems were all in in the underworld and beneath the earth. But then when we think about the times when we need to take a step back, or we need to do a retreat for and incubate, life doesn't always necessarily line up for us to be able to do that, especially if we've got responsibilities or dependents or other things that we can't really sort of detach ourselves away from. But the good thing about this card, when it comes up and sort of suggests that is a course of action that needs to be taken, if you remember obviously the story from the Homeric hymn, Hecate was in her cave, but she still was aware of what was going on. So it's not a complete detachment and a complete removal. It's just you need to sort of maybe put some things on the back burner whilst you kind of gather yourself and prepare yourself for the next stage. Because when you do come out, then it will be more fully realized, it'll be more actualized, and you'll be more ready for what comes next, rather than sort of feeling as though you've been plunged down into a subterranean cavern in the dark and you don't know what you're doing. It's not about detachment, it's just about distancing, I suppose, from from the hustle and bustle of everyday life.
It kind of takes me back to when we were talking about the new moon card as well, in that there is that kind of temporary feeling of gestation, retreat, in preparation for re-emergence. Yeah I could go there. That's one of the joys of designing that, because I like creating landscapes that I would like to step into, and that's one of them.
And there's it definitely has that sort of inviting air to it, that sort of portal-esque.
Yeah.
Because although you've got these tunnels of the cave wall, they're not straight, they're not flush. No. So you might have to stoop or walk a little bit. But there's the thing that beyond that is the cave, and so there's still other bits that you can't see because of the angles, and so it's very much it's an inviting card, because it's inviting you to go further.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Now let's move on to, I think this is one of the important ones for you, isn't it? And it's certainly one of the most specific.
And again, I think card 39 is the temple at Lagina. And the key word is sacredness. Now, a lot of people don't. I mean, obviously, people that know Hecate quite well, have worked with her for a number of years. They'll be aware of the temple complex in Lagina, which is now modern day Turkey.
Okay.
Western Turkey, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Western Turkey. And basically, it was one of the big main known centers of worship where Hecate actually had a temple to her, rather than her being sort of like an addition to other temples, such as like at the gateways and things like that. And there's a nearby city, and I cannot pronounce it properly. It's like Stratanakia or something. But basically, over the course of excavations, that they found a connecting road between the temple and the city, and this, that there is evidence that processions occurred between them at certain times of the year, in what was sometimes referred to as the procession of the key, and it was the key to the city, or would be processed to the temple to be blessed and back again, or I think sometimes maybe from the temple to the city and back again. But yeah, the notion of this, this remnant of this center of worship, for me, my first experience of it was there's a book called Savage Breast by Tim Ward, and he writes it's kind of half travel experiential booklet, but he basically is following ancient goddesses across the world as he's traveling and going to the museums and the ruins and things like that. And he has a chapter on Hecate, and he goes to this temple complex, or what's left of it, at Laguna, and his description of his experience of the goddess whilst he's there is very tangible, and it's very visceral. And that was my first experience of it. And then obviously I've come to know a few people online who obviously have been to visit it themselves, as well as people. I've got to know a few people that kind of live nearby, and they often take photographs. And there are modern devotees now that go there to perform worship and such. It is my hope that one day I might make it there. I am not the most accomplished traveler, but this is one of those places I would make the effort to go. But this central image of this gateway, this archway, when the temple complex was kind of excavated, all that was really there at the time was obviously what was left of the floor, some of the stairs, and then obviously loads of broken columns and bits all over the place. And the one and only thing that they initially reconstructed was this arch doorway, it stands in front of this stone staircase. Right. Obviously, since then there's been some more work done, so I think they've re-erected a lot of the pillars now, and they're obviously, when the season's on, they're still excavating and finding more things as they go. So obviously the photograph is of the photograph that we use, the stock image that we used of the ruin, is obviously a modern image of how it was today. And yet I wanted to sort of superimpose this ancient figure, this priestess, still standing in the gateway, in that liminal space between time and reality. And the fact that, despite the fact that a lot of people will say, oh well, these are just ruins, there's no magic in them, there's no power in them, etc., that these are still the homes of our gods. These are still and the holiness and the sanctity is still there.
I think as well, I mean, the power is in history, and we have this kind of ridiculously flat view of the world in 3 dimensions, length, breadth, and height. But actually, the world actually exists in 4 dimensions: length, breadth, height, and time. And actually, one of the things that they're starting to realize is that we generally perceive time in a linear manner, whereas time, like all other things, is simply a dimension and it can be stepped outside of. We don't have that ability. So in effect, our perception of time is in past, present, or future, but actually there is an argument for the fact that all times are one, and we are very much connected, you know. So to me, if you step into one of those spaces, you know, we're kind of perceiving it in a linear fashion, yet we are very, very powerfully connected just because of our place on that thread of time. You know, we move along it, but the thread itself is very, very solid. So yeah, and I think there are certain places that you go to where you just feel things, you feel a presence, you know, you kind of feel as if it's timeless. And I think sometimes that is, you know, the inexplicable way that we kind of perceive that reality, that all times are one. So yeah, to me, just because something is in the past, the power of it doesn't vanish, it's there. And I think stepping into a place like this in particular, I think you would really be stepping quite powerfully into the presence of the goddess and everyone who's worshipped there, you know, over the millennia. It's a lovely addition to the deck, and it's the one that really makes it real for me, because I know when you explained to me, this is the one place that was very, very specifically hers, you know, and there's quite a complex of ruins still standing, isn't there? You know?
Yeah, and as I say, that, you know, that they've been excavating more and more and finding more and more. I think in sort of the recent last 12 months, they found you know, more statuettes and things of Hecate in these triple forms that she's so well known for. And you know, there's still so much being found and revealed about how she was venerated in that particular location, in that particular sort of time period.
So what time period are we talking?
Well, now you're asking. Let me just check my notes. I might have it. No, hang on. No. Not off the top of my head, I don't. But we're probably I think it's probably 3rd, 2nd century BC, maybe maybe further back than that. Don't quote me on that one.
We're definitely talking BC.
Oh god, yeah. Obviously, you know, when we think about the, you know, the big temples that we see, they never usually started off like a huge temple to start with. Obviously, in the heyday of, you know, the religious movements of the time, they probably would, but they were all kind of built on and expanded upon over time as, you know, things developed. And I think, you know, the temple at Laguna is probably the same. It probably started fairly small and then was built on and expanded to accommodate, you know, basically based on the fact that this goddess obviously held a huge amount of importance to the people locally. And so, you know, if a god or goddess is of importance to you and they are, you know, seen to be doing things to, you know, to your benefit, of course you're going to build them temples. You're not going to just go, oh yeah, thanks, you know, we're not going to bother, you know, because, you know, in the great cycle of, you know, reciprocity, or however you pronounce it, the you know, it is a little bit of give and take. It's not that they're cosmic cash machines, but you know, you've got to kind of give something for the, you know, if you want something back.
Now let's move on to number 40. This is intriguing because this, to me, also foreshadows the last 3 cards in the deck. And visually, there's kind of references that pay homage to it to me. I love doing this one. This was one of the most visually interesting. This is the card number 40, the Axis Mundi card. And the keyword that you've given this is crux. So explain this to me again, because I mean, again, you talked about this when we were creating it, but I've got a short memory.
The concept of the Axis Mundi, the Anima Mundi, as Hecate is known, again, it goes back to this Chaldean oracle interpretation of her as this cosmic world soul. But also, you know, when it's the Axis Mundi, it's also, you know, it references a sort of column or tree of lifestyle like image. And we already know from previous cards that we've explored that Hecate had dominion over the heavens, the earth, and the sea.
Yeah.
And so taking sort of inspiration from the notions of, you know, the world tree or the world pillar, as it sometimes is understood, and you seeing Hecate in that colossal cosmic scale, bridging between those three realms.
Yeah.
That was kind of where I wanted to come with it from, that she is the center of all of those worlds, and she's all of them combined. And from a shamanic point of view, you know, she enables travel up and down the different realms if you're doing journeying or dream work or anything like that. And yeah, I wanted to sort of play around with that cosmic scope of things without making it too static and rigid. I wanted to leave it a little bit ambiguous, and that's why we kind of opted for the silhouette over a statue. But just to sort of invite the fact that at the center of everything, at this cosmic nexus, stands this great cosmic goddess who ensouls everything. And when you sort of look at it in those terms, you feel like an infinitesimal speck, in comparison. But the fact that this, that whole colossal concept, it does make you think about what the crux of your life or your your dilemma is, what it is. It really tries to sort of get to the very point of it.
So from a divination point of view, I mean, you're really talking the cornerstone or the keystone of any situation, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I wondered about this. I mean, with the last card, from a divination point of view, the last card is kind of, for me, is quite straightforward because it really is talking about sacred space, and stepping onto hallowed ground. Whereas this one, when I first encountered it, it's so awe-inspiring, but at the same time, you think, well, yeah, how does that relate? But I suppose it kind of, in any situation in life, you're immediately looking and thinking, well, what's the foundation here? What's everything attached to? What's holding it all together? And yeah.
And that's it. I mean, you say about the previous card, obviously, that was a place of sanctity, of reverence. But yeah, when you think about and I think this is a very telling sort of modern thing, the vast majority of us are completely removed from the world, from, earth and nature and things like that. And they're as sacred as anything else. And it's, you wouldn't, most of us wouldn't think of going into a place of worship, as they stand today, and doing something, destructive or profane. You just wouldn't do it unless one of the rare examples. But we do it all the time to the planet and to the environment and things like that, and we don't really think about it because we've removed ourselves and elevated ourselves in such a way that it's doesn't really register what we're doing because it's always been there.
I think this is the danger of patriarchal religion, in that, and certainly one of the dangers with monotheism is you stop seeing the sacredness in nature. You stop seeing the world that we live in as something sacred. I think particularly because so much of monotheism places God so much higher and above the earth, and actually teaches that the earth is something that is corrupted. It's gradually eroded our respect for the earth, I think, on so many levels. Whereas actually what you've said there, and actually meditating on this card now, really just reminds me to treat the whole of our surroundings as sacred space. And that's quite a daunting thing to do, because I mean, we none of us grew up, very few of us grew up with that being instilled in us. And actually it brings with it a whole set of challenges, even in terms of our daily life, how we live our life, our carbon footprint, our pollution footprint, our consumer footprint. And you think, oh, that's got consequences. which is immediately making this one of the more uncomfortable cards.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
not in a bad way.
Like with most cards and symbols, there are, you know, you can look at them at a very superficial level, but actually when you start to go deeper into them, and when they do make you uncomfortable, that's when they're doing what they're meant to do.
Working.
Yeah, I mean, I say this about tarot and other forms of sort of cartomancy and divination, that I'm a firm believer that they tell you what you need to know, not what you want to hear. And there's too much of this where, I mean, I've had experience of this when I've read for you know, in public, where you get certain people will come for a reading, but they tell you what the reading is going to say. Or as you're talking, they're just talking over you and interpreting the cards to fit their agenda, even if that's not what they're saying. And sometimes you just can't guide people because they just want to know, you know, the best outcome, regardless of whether it's actually going to work out or not.
Yeah. And it's as you say, the tarot tells us what we need to hear very often. I mean, I can remember the second professional reading I did, and it was just really, really threw me at the time, because the guy I was reading for, I mean, no matter what the cards were saying, he kept coming back to the same thing. But when am I going to make some money? And, and you know, no matter how much I explain, you know, this reading is not talking about money. But, you know, it's a classic example of, you know, that's what he wanted to hear, but then at the same time completely missing the message of what was there. So yeah, you're right. That's a very good way of putting it. If the cards are making you feel uncomfortable, yeah, they are doing their job. And this one certainly has some quite massive challenges in it, all for the good, I suppose, you know.
Yeah.
Should we move on to the next one?
Yeah, because this is quite, again, it's quite a simple card, but it's one of my favorites. I quite like it.
But it's special because it was the first one.
Yeah. Yes, that's true.
This was where it started, wasn't it? So it was. This was the first image that we created, and it is quite simple and straightforward. But I think it's the image that we realised fairly quickly that we could work together with this, didn't we? Because I think it was a case of you'd given me what was in effect one of the more straightforward images from the deck to do, but then visually I was able to convince you that I was the right artist for the job just because of what I did with it, wasn't it? So yeah, I have a great affection for this one, as well as finding it visually very pleasing and also visually very awe-inspiring because of what it is. So this is number 41. This is Hecate's wheel. And the keyword on this is cycles, isn't it?
So the symbol of Hecate's wheel actually hasn't got anything to do with Hecate specifically that we know of from antiquity. This is something that a lot of people, this is a thing that a lot of people kind of are quite shocked about when they find out about it. Because it is used a lot today, you know, people recognize it, you know, quite readily, and they will, you know, as Hecate's wheel. And, you know, in a lot of more modern books, you will find it written down as a symbol of Hecate, and that, you know, it represents, you know, serpentine or labyrinthine type sort of energies. But actually, the earliest sort of examples of this patterning, this symbol is just on sort of decorative buttons that were found in Mycenae. And there's been a few other examples that have cropped up, but they've never been in a sort of devotional or sacred context alongside Hecate. They've usually been decorative and you know, just sort of either on bits of jewelry or you know, buttons and things like that. But that doesn't detract away from the fact that it's now become one of the, you know, one of the most recognized symbols of the goddess. There's been some sort of misassociation between the symbol and what is known as a strophalos, which was like a whirligig sort of tool. That's again, it's described in the Chaldean oracles. It was a form of divination or theurgy where you sort of span this contraption that the noise that it made, either because it was a piece, I think it was a sapphire or a piece of lapis lazuli that was inside like a brass or gilded sort of cage and then spun. And then there were obviously the more extreme versions where wryneck birds were attached to these discs and then spun, and then obviously the noise that the birds are making as they're going hell for leather round is supposed to draw the gods down for you to get messages from. But so there was this misconflation between the symbol supposedly being one of these strapholoi. And
you've just clarified for me, because I've been using these terms interchangeably without realizing.
And some people still do. I mean, there again, there are references to the use of strapholoi in ancient sources. There is a vase painting of, I think it's Aphrodite, and she is using one.
Okay.
And it's literally like a serrated disc on two lengths of like strapping or cord or something. And the thing is again, modern people in their interpretations, there are devotees out there that now make these similarly based on the old whirligig toy. That it's that perpetual motion that does it, but it's the noise and the whirring that was generated that can be used either meditatively or to raise energy and such. So again, it's this nice, if not altogether accurate, synergy between the past and the present. And so when I wanted to include the symbol in the card, obviously I wanted to sort of reflect this generative, whirring, cyclical nature. And I suppose I'm kind of hinting at sort of Wheel of Fortune style card.
Wheel of Fortune, Wheel of the Year, Wheel of the Seasons, all of those sort of things.
Exactly. As you said previously, we perceive everything quite linear most of the time, and it isn't. It cycles. Everything is a cycle. Nothing ends and is depending on what your afterlife thoughts are, there is nothing really that ends and then that's it. There's always something. And then that's the start of another cycle, and that's what this card sort of represents. This is where you've got to sort of assess where in the cycle you are, or where in the cycle you want to be.
Okay.
And obviously, you can then look at the practical use of the symbol in this whirring ability to sort of draw down the goddess and receive messages. So there's a couple of different ways it can be looked at. But yeah, I definitely it was one of those ones I was like, yeah, this has to be in there, but I don't want it to be static, and I don't want it to be sort of perpetuating the misunderstanding of what the symbol is and where it comes from. And as I say, I like the fact that hopefully I've managed to kind of bridge the gap between something that had no association, but that now actually has become so intrinsic to Hecate's devotees in the modern context.
Yeah. It's, as I say, it's lovely. It will always forever have a special place for me, like with card number 23 being the last, with this one being the first. They kind of bookend the deck for me, so very, very special. Now, moving on to the final one we're doing today. I know this is your favorite, isn't it?
Yes.
Card number 42, the Aconite card, and the keyword on this is death.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously that's quite a literal interpretation, which anybody that knows aconite knows it is a deadly poison. And we talked about the inclusion of other herbs in one card with the pharmakeia card.
Yes.
But wolfsbane aconite, it was one of those cards that I felt it needed to be a standalone card, for the simple reason that obviously it is so associated with Hecate and her sort of flavor of witchcraft, shall we say.
Right.
It was known as Hecateus in certain sources. So basically, it was kind of known as the herb of Hecate. It was
the actual herb itself. We featured on the card, haven't we? From what are antique botanical drawings.
Yes.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's been it was used by Medea, and it was kind of just. It was just always sort of linked with this, maybe not savory magic, but this ability to affect change, via Hecate's auspices.
Yeah.
And obviously, in a literal term, it is a poison, and it's deadly poison. But again, it was this notion that when, like with the tarot, the death card doesn't mean death, and even though aconite can mean literal death, it's more about the sort of transformative notion of death, that just the same way as the myth sort of originates as how it came to be. It's it's said that when Hercules was dragging Cerberus out of the underworld by his leash, the foaming spittle and saliva that hit the ground, that's where aconite sprang up. And so it has this sort of canine underworld sort of connection that it's easy to then associate it with Hecate. And again, I didn't want it to just be a pretty flower on a deck. And I think what we did do is we kind of went with the literal sort of thing of wolf's bane.
Yes.
Obviously another name for it. And then so we went with this lupine skull against this sort of in this backdrop of the botanical image, but with this really sort of quite sickly, almost putrid purples and green tone.
Well, the funny thing is there were two things that struck me with this. This card kind of came together more organically than any other, because we had two basic source images, an antique lithograph of aconite from a botanical treatise, and of course this photo of the wolf's skull. Now, the skull on the card is green, but the color, the colorization of that, I just lifted the green straight from the leaves of the aconite from the print. The other thing was, we took the botanical, botanical lithograph, and I kind of started mirroring it, didn't it, and layering it.
Yeah.
And then when we dropped the skull in, the irony was the skull just fitted in perfectly. It kind of it was as if it was just kind of engulfed by the aconite flowers, wasn't it? So it was a very swift image to do, but at the same time, it was one that just almost as if it was kind of waiting to happen. And you're still waiting for the T-shirt, aren't you?
I am.
Kenn wants Oracle of the Hekatean Path aconite death T-shirts. So I'm not quite sure the kind of the ethos of the merch is. But no, it's again. I suppose as from a divination point of view, it really does have parallels with the tarot death card, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And certainly, in terms of the poison aspect of it, if you're looking just purely from that perspective, how would you treat that in a reading?
Well, again, it would be dependent on where, what the other cards were sort of hinting at. But, if you think about poison, both figuratively and literally, maybe somebody is dripping poison into a situation. Maybe somebody is poisoning the air with, lies and deceptions that so you can sort of interpret it in those kind of ways. But then
It's
sometimes
interesting because that I mean, okay, we've got shades of the death card, but then it really does give it a more subtle edge, doesn't it? Because you're also, I mean, in the Lenormand deck, you have the card of the mice, which is very often that's the kind of slow drip poison and the slow drip malicious gossip card in the Lenormand. So it's kind of quite interesting to have that aspect combined with the death aspect as well, which makes it a very powerful and challenging card, doesn't it? It really does make you challenge your relationships and your relationship groups and interpersonal dynamics.
Yeah, and I mean, I can think of different cards that it could be married up with, that could hint at things like that. So you might get the Heroes Peer card Unity, which is very communal, community based. But if this one comes up alongside it, this is possibly it's the wrong group, it's the wrong community, or maybe there is an element of somebody or something within it that is not altogether wholesome. And so so there's that kind of thing, or you might get Nycteria with secrets, and maybe there's lies and deception going on in that respect. So I think it can depending on a person's understanding of both the oracle as a whole, but also this symbol of aconite and what it actually means, just beyond the fact that it is a poison. There are different ways it will and can be interpreted, both negatively and positively, which I hope all the cards have a negative and a positive, dependent on how they fall in a reading.
It's fascinating. And on that note, that's another 6 cards, isn't it? So thanks for bearing with us, and do join us next time, because next time we'll be going through cards 43 to 48. So and covering one of my big personal favorites in the process. So once again, thanks for joining us. We do hope you've enjoyed it, and bear with us, and do join us next time. Take care.